And I saw the way my parents were treated during the GFC, where they'd been loyal to their employer for 20 years, and then the minute there's a GFC or a pandemic or whatever, they're being made redundant. So why would you expect me to be? They've learnt the lessons from our generation, and they're saying it's not relevant to me anymore. If I don't want to work here, I'll just leave and find another job next week. If I want to travel, I can travel the world, probably work wherever I want, work remotely wherever I want, work as a subcontractor if I choose to. So all of these old paradigms no longer make any sense. And so the people, who are owning or leading these businesses are going, oh my God, younger people, how do we deal with this? Well, you have to, because you're not going to see the culture that you grew up in being sustained anymore. It's no longer relevant. So you either adapt or you die.
Welcome back to Secrets of a Corporate Game. So many people are trying to navigate a corporate world that is laden with secrets, cleverly hidden and unspoken rules to a game that most employees don't even know they're playing. On this podcast, we try to give you a peek behind the curtain and unveil some of those secrets with tips and tricks that you can apply today to start taking control of your career and progress up the ladder faster. Hey guys, get excited for today's episode. We are talking about hiring and retaining great talent with Richard Triggs. Richard has coached over 2,500 senior executives and board directors through their job searches. He has his own podcast. He's written multiple books. He is going to be such a wealth of knowledge for everybody tuning in today. Welcome, Richard. It is so great to have you on the show.
Excellent. Thanks, Kendall. I really appreciate the opportunity and looking forward to having a wonderful chat.
Yeah, and it's great for us because where I am stateside, it is like late afternoon, and where Richard is, he just woke up. So we'll have differing levels of energy, but coffee on both sides, which is what really
fair enough. Do I look like I just got out of bed? That must be
Not
it.
at all. You look stunning. You woke up like this. Great.
Awesome.
Well, Richard, why don't you introduce yourself to our listeners? Tell them a little bit about your background, both professional and then your transition into what you're doing now.
Okay, sure. Well, I'm based in Brisbane, Australia. It's summer here, and I'm not sure of what the comparison is centigrade to Fahrenheit, but yesterday was 38 degrees centigrade, and we were all walking around dripping with sweat, whereas obviously it's winter where I'm talking to you at the moment, so not only a time difference, but very much a climate difference as well. I own a company called Arete Executive. We're what you call an executive search or headhunting firm. Arete is a Greek word. It means the fulfillment of one's full potential. And it's been a wild ride. We started the business at the height of the global financial crisis back in 2009, and we've seen it through pandemics and all sorts of other interesting local and global events in that time. But we're still here, and which I'm quite pleased and proud about. And so our predominant thing that we do is we're engaged by organisations to go out and search for and hire for them very senior executives, right through to CEO and board level. And we've worked across pretty much all industries. We've worked across all role functions. And we've even done executive search work for companies in America based here in Brisbane. It's been amazing. I think one of the silver linings of the cloud of COVID was now people are pretty comfortable having a Zoom or a Teams-based conversation and relationship. And so we've actually been engaged by American companies to headhunt Americans for jobs in America. And I thought at the time, wow, I wonder what a candidate's going to feel like getting a call from some Aussie in Brisbane offering them a job, but it's gone very well. So, yeah, the globe truly has become much smaller. And then, of course, the other side of because of the work that I do, I get lots of senior executives come to me and say, Richard, I'm looking for a new job. Can you offer me some advice? And so I wrote a book called Uncover the Hidden Job Market, which came out in 2015. The second edition of that just came out last year. And I coach a lot of board directors and senior executives through their process of how they find a new job. So it's not really a big part of our income, but it's a service that we offer to people to help them.
It's amazing. And you started off on the flip side, right? In the corporate world, you were navigating that yourself from the inside, and now you've moved to kind of the outside. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about that journey too, because I think it's so fascinating how you've kind of developed this skill set over time.
Well, I finished high school and I had grand aspirations to be a rock and roll star. So I toured Australia for about 4 years singing and playing guitar in a bunch of bands. And then I realized that it's a very, very hard living to be successful at, and you needed a lot of luck, and it's a pretty hard lifestyle. So I rang my parents and said, please let me come home and go back to uni. So I went and did a business degree majoring in marketing and HR. And then I worked for a couple of major corporates in Australia, predominantly in the building services industry, in sales, and then in operations, and then in more sort of general management roles. And when I was in my early 30s, I was working for a company and I was just finishing an executive MBA and started to think, what do I want to do when I grow up, which a lot of people who do MBAs seem to do. And I went to see a recruiter that I'd been a client of and to say, look, it's probably time for me to think about something else. And they said, oh, have you ever thought about working in the recruiting industry? And so I just kind of fell into it like a lot of people do. And I worked at the time for a company called TMP Worldwide, now called Hudson, biggest recruitment company in the world. I worked with them for a year, realized that I've thoroughly enjoyed recruitment, but didn't really enjoy the culture of that particular business. So I then joined a smaller boutique business where I worked for 5 or 6 years before starting my own. So yes, I've worked in some big global multinational corporates, and I've worked in some smaller businesses, and now I have the opportunity to recruit for all of those as well.
It's so amazing how the skills that we build over the course of our career can manifest in so many different ways, right? Like you mentioned, you started in sales and operations. And to me, I've talked about this with people on my team that to me, recruiting is like the sales of people. I'm going to sell the company to you. I'm going to sell you to my company, right? It's that same skill set, but manifesting in a different way. And so it's been so amazing to hear about your journey and how you've grown as an individual, and having worked with so many different companies, both privately when you were employed, but also then in the industry you're in now recruiting for them. What sets apart a company that recruits really great talent from a company that struggles to find the right people?
Yeah, well, I think to answer that question in two parts. Firstly, I think you're absolutely right. Working in recruitment, whether you're working in-house for a company or in a consulting environment like myself, it is a sales job. And I think the recruiting industry has a very, very high turnover. I'm not sure about in the States, but I think the statistic in Australia is something like 90% of people who start working in recruitment leave within 2 years, never to return. And that's because somebody's a lawyer. They go, I'm a little bit sick of being a lawyer. Well, why don't you become a legal recruiter or an architect or an engineer or an accountant or what have you, not realizing that they're actually a salesperson for exactly the reasons you said. We need to sell the candidate on the opportunity and sell the employer on why they're a great candidate, as well as, of course, of selling ourselves to the employer as to why we're the right person to recruit the job. So coming then to your question, I think, and I say this, I get into a lot of trouble for saying this, but I believe that most in-house recruiters are external recruiters who go in-house because they've been unsuccessful in an external environment. Otherwise, why would they go in-house? I mean, you can earn a lot more money as an external recruiter, but what often they're taking in-house is this perspective of, we're the employer and people should feel so grateful to work for us. And therefore, we don't really need to put much energy into selling the opportunity. And I think one of the clearest illustrations of that, and again, talking in Australian context, although I'm sure it's the same in the US, job advertisements that these people are writing are uninspiring. They lack a lot of detail. There's no employer value proposition. There's nothing to get candidates excited about the opportunity. It's really just a regurgitation of a position description. And 95 times out of 100 now, certainly in Australia, there's nobody's name or phone number for a candidate to ring up and ask any questions. And so what I say is, imagine a great candidate. They're not actively looking for a job. They happen across your ad. It piques some interest in them. They go, oh, that could be an interesting opportunity for me. I'm not sure. I'd love to ask some questions, especially if it's with a competitor and I'm concerned about my confidentiality. There's no way that I'm going to apply unless I can ring and ask some questions to make sure it's something that I'm truly, legitimately interested in. Oh, there's nobody to ring. Right? And I say to these internal recruitment people, why don't you put your name and phone number on the ad? And they say, quite straightforwardly, oh, because we don't want candidates to ring us. Which I think's insane. I mean, from your perspective, Kendall, is that what you're seeing over there?
Absolutely. And it's so interesting that you're calling this out because I think of the generational shift of job searching, right? And when I was young and fresh out of school, I remember my parents saying, well, why don't you just go to the company and hand them your resume? And me being like, you can't do that. Like, they won't even let you in the parking lot, let alone into the building in front of a person to hand them a resume, right? Those days have passed. And so I went to job fairs, which was, when you're coming out of schooling, there's a lot more opportunity for that than in the professional setting. And I got to meet people, and that's how I landed my first job. But every job I've ever had since then is because I knew somebody at that company and I could do exactly what you're saying. I could call them. What do you think about the company culture? What do you think about the team? I saw this position. Do you think it'd be a good fit for me? What do you know about this part of the organization? And I don't cold apply. I go to somebody, right? And this idea that recruiting needs to be so far removed from the end person, I think, to your point, turns off a lot of candidates, but it also makes it harder to recruit the right candidates because you can't
completely
match those up. So it's so interesting you're calling this out. I'd never thought about it from that perspective.
Well, the other way, I talk about it is that, let's say I am a good candidate. I apply for a job with an organisation. 8 weeks later, I've had no acknowledgement of my application. I have no awareness as to whether I'm in contention. I don't know whether I'm going to be pulled forward for an interview, and there's nobody's name for me to ring up and ask. Imagine how damaging that is to that company's employer of choice reputation, because candidates are being treated like an absolute commodity. And in this environment of what we call the war for talent, my new book coming out is called Winning the War for Talent. But I think the reality is the war for talent is a cliche that people use as an excuse for not being good at hiring. Oh, sorry, boss, we didn't get any good candidates, but it's a war for talent. It's not really a war for talent. It's just that you're not very good at doing what you're doing. But also coming back to what you're just saying there, Kendall, I mean, when I'm talking to candidates, my book, Uncover the Hidden Job Market, is exactly what you're saying about approaching the key decision makers directly in order to access the hidden job market opportunities. We might talk more about that later or on another podcast. But the other side of it too is, organizations, particularly their leadership team, they need to really focus on building their brand. Why are they an employer of choice? And why are their leaders of choice? And one of the easiest ways to do that, which is so overlooked, is people's LinkedIn profiles. So, for example, if I look at the top 20 listed companies in Australia, I think if I look at their CEOs, 17 out of 20 of them don't even have a LinkedIn profile. Those organisations, if I look across their leadership team, the vast majority of their LinkedIn profiles are poorly written. They contain virtually no information. There's nothing there that would inspire you to want to go and work for that person. Why organizations put all of this money into branding their business, into building amazing websites to attract customers, and yet why don't they invest time and money? If their biggest asset is their people, then why not have LinkedIn profiles which are consistent, that have a quality of brand, that really feature, the exciting career opportunities of working those businesses? Because every future employee is looking at your LinkedIn profile. So that is such a massive opportunity. And there are all the way through the recruitment process, there are fundamental things which are easy to do, which in the majority of instances are not done very well. And by making those changes, would vastly improve an organization's ability not only to attract the best talent, but also to retain the best talent, which is critical to success.
Richard, LinkedIn, I feel like, is growing so much as a social platform in recent years, where I'm starting to see a lot more what I would call interaction, right? People posting to their feeds, people sharing their companies, sharing their roles. And so I love that you're highlighting the executive LinkedIn page, because I think from a being recruited perspective, I'm going to go to your company page on LinkedIn. I'm going to see who the executives are. I'm going to check out their pages. If there are reviews, I'm going to read reviews. And then I'm going to talk to somebody. Like, even if you've already reached out, I'm going to wait and do all that, and then I'll talk to you, right? I want to have my understanding complete. And so when you think of how these companies are reaching out and recruiting the great talent, starting to retain them, I agree with you. I think having that consistent brand image, right? What makes us great? Why should you want to work here? Because while we are a commodity market, I like that phrasing of we're treating recruiting as a commodity market. Your high performing talent, they'll go wherever they want, right? They're being recruited by everybody, right? The people you want should be being recruited by all of your competitors if they're the right talent, right? And so, when we think of the company's perspective, you mentioned LinkedIn profiles of your executives. You mentioned contact points for potential candidates to reach out. What are other ways that companies should and leaders should be thinking about recruiting great talent?
Okay. So, yes, I think that LinkedIn is becoming much more than what it was originally intended for. There's a concept in marketing, it's called the zero moment of truth. So let's, say, for example, I want to buy a new car, and I decide I'm an old man, I'm 55, so of course old men drive Volvos, right? That comes with the territory.
I drive a Volvo.
Ah, there you go.
Old men drive Volvos, and me. Yes.
So, of course, the first moment of truth is when you go to the car yard and physically see the car, and you get in the car and you take it for a test drive. That is where you're making your decision, do I want to buy this car or not? But prior to that, the zero moment of truth is all of the time, looking at the website, reading the brochures, watching the reviews on YouTube, exactly the things that you talked about. I'm doing all of that before I decide if I want to be bothered to go and drive a Volvo or whatever it is. Well, it's the same thing. It's not only prospective employers that are looking at your LinkedIn profile or recruiters, it's future staff members, it's suppliers, it's customers, it's contractors, it's joint venture parties, it's every single person that you interact with in business now. I literally look at every single person's LinkedIn profile before I have a conversation with them. And that is, the case. So you can't deny the power of LinkedIn. But then again, if we're staying within that employer branding perspective for a moment, you look at a lot of companies' websites, and they might have their vision and their values. And their vision, one of their values is our team is our greatest asset. And yet their website is entirely written from the perspective of selling their products or services to their customers. There's no emphasis on employees. Where are the pages that clearly articulate why this company is an employer of choice? The stories, the testimonials. If the CEO has won an award, or they've had a charity event, or, what are the things that they can be doing to build their brand, as this is more than just, ABC company. This is somewhere I'd be inspired to work. Look at this amazing philanthropic work that they're doing, or how they're developing their staff, or, their commitment to diversity, whatever it is. There's so much money being put into trying to win customers. Really, our people are our greatest asset. It's a bit of a naff thing to say. It doesn't really mean anything. The other, again, that's a critical thing to do. Their key leaders should be out speaking at conferences. They should be appearing on podcasts. Maybe they have their own podcast. They should be writing, blogs and doing everything that they can to attract the greatest talent, because good talent is not reading job ads. They are in jobs, they're well paid, they like their boss, they are not actively looking for a new opportunity, they're passive. But if they see something that makes them go, wow, there is something that really attracts me to work for Kendall's business, they're going to be far more likely to engage in a recruitment process. And yet so many companies are still totally dependent on, we'll just put an ad up on a job board and pray the right person applies. And we're so naive. We don't even think that we have to put somebody's name or phone number on there. And then you'll have in-house recruiters who will say, but I sent a few LinkedIn messages. Oh, hi, Bill, this is, Sally from ABC Company. We've got a job. Are you interested? And it doesn't work. That is the time where engaging a third-party headhunter is critically important, but there's so many things you could do before that would either reduce the need for third-party recruiters or make it a much more seamless process regardless.
Your holistic thought process, I think, is very thought-provoking here because you're talking about the company website. And I'm thinking about the companies where there's nothing in the main page. You have to scroll down to the bottom, and in the footer, there's a little button that says careers. You click that and it takes you to a list, right? Like a lot of companies, that is the max they do for recruiting talent.
Sure.
Footer on their website to see the jobs they have posted. There's no employee page. There's no values page. And you're talking about the CEOs going and speaking, or their executives being on podcasts and sharing information. And one of the things I do when I work with executive individuals who are looking for jobs is I'm like, you need to be posting to your LinkedIn feed. You need to be active on social media. You need to be talking about articles that interest you, thoughts that interest you, ideas that are new and innovative in your space, because that's going to separate you from your peers. And the idea of the business doing that in return, I think you're right, does set it apart and does help those companies ultimately recruit the right people in your, I forget what you called it, but that like zero time decision.
The zero moment of truth.
Zero moment of truth. I love that. And that zero moment of truth, you're right. I do a ton of research. I think anybody should. And there are some companies, I believe, you get a job there for the equivalent of a blue check mark, right? Like, yes, in my industry, this is the company to work for, to say but it's miserable and nobody's happy there, but you do it for 2 years. You can put that on your resume and then you move on to something you enjoy. But for all the other companies, you're not getting that influx of talent just by name recognition. And even for those companies, you might miss out on the right people because of that name recognition. But I think that when we think of how you can proactively go out and recruit talent, right? You said, there's a time where it's beneficial to the company to go recruit external recruiters and have them help, or there's time to start doing that outreach. What does that look like? How can companies proactively be going out to find the right people?
Sorry, are you saying if they were to do it directly themselves or they were to do it through a third-party recruiter?
Either. What would that look like from a proactive outreach perspective?
Okay, sure. Well, I mean, again, LinkedIn became an extremely valuable tool to recruiters because it enabled us to be able to search very easily and find key personnel in businesses pretty much anywhere in the world. I was one of the first adopters of LinkedIn in Australia, and my book, Uncover the Hidden Job Market, is very much around LinkedIn. Burst to LinkedIn. They believed that LinkedIn would see them out of a job, and they're very angry about it. Of course, it wasn't long before LinkedIn was acquired, and then they went, there's money in this for us. And so they started to sell LinkedIn recruiter licenses, which are quite expensive. But for example, in my business, we are totally reliant on them. So the challenge for the challenge is that if an internal HR person they use LinkedIn, they find people within their competitors' organizations that they want to target. Of course, if they reach out and say they have to disclose who they are and where they work, because people will see it straight away on their LinkedIn profile. So let's call our recruiter, Sam. Sam's a nice gender neutral name. And so Sam, who works for Coca-Cola, reaches out to PepsiCo. She's got to say, hi, I'm Sam from Coke. Do you want a job? Now, of course, there are organisations who may not want their competitors to know that they are directly headhunting their staff. Or it may be that there's a person in a job who's not performing and they need to be replaced and they don't want the market to know that. Or there may be a strategic initiative, something that they're wanting to do, and they don't want their competitors or perhaps even their customers to know that they're doing that. So it's very difficult for an in-house HR/recruitment person to be able to headhunt with any privacy. So using a third-party recruiter in that situation is a lot more intelligent, because Richard from Arete Executive can reach out to the person at Pepsi and say, look, I'm currently recruiting this role, and you've been referred to me as somebody who may be interested. Can I ask you whether you'd be open to having a conversation? So I can do that without disclosing that my client is Coke, and therefore I'm maintaining that confidentiality and also protecting the employer of choice brand for my client. The other thing is, a lot of candidates may not want to engage directly with the employer because they could be concerned about their own confidentiality, or they might be holding on to a belief, my friend used to work for that company 20 years ago and they weren't treated very well, so therefore I'm not going to be interested in a job with that business. So what we're able to do is, again, going back to the comments earlier about sales, we're able to create the right bait to attract that talent, engage them in a process, and then, as it's appropriate, reveal who the employer is. I mean, we are specialists at it. One thing in Australia, which is quite prevalent, again, not so sure about in the US, is the vast majority of recruitment companies work contingently, which means that they're only paid on a successful placement. And organisations may engage multiple contingent agencies whilst they're also trying to fill the role themselves, and they're only going to pay the company that presents the candidate that ends up getting hired. And I think that is a really dumb way to do business. I couldn't imagine I go to a lawyer and I say, listen, I just murdered my next door neighbour because their dog kept barking all night and I lost it and I murdered my neighbour. And so what I want to do is I want to engage 5 law firms to represent me, and whichever law firm gets me the lowest sentence, I'll pay, and the rest of you work for free. Would you like the work? The lawyer would say, no way. Or if I said to an architect, I'm going to engage 5 people to design my building, whoever gives me the best design, I'll pay, and everybody else works for free. Would you do it? Of course they wouldn't. And yet here are these idiot recruiters who go, oh, sure thing. I'll happily invest all this time, knowing that 4 times out of 5 I'm not going to get any money because I'm dumb. Right. And a big reason why the recruitment industry has a bad reputation is because, of course, a lot of these recruiters, they take the job, they don't get much success, they throw a few candidates that aren't really on brief, praying that one of them gets hired. It gets a bit hard. They walk away, and the employer's saying, well, hang on a second. These recruiters are they're just rubbish. So, for example, we only work on a retained exclusive basis. I think that if an organisation wants to attract and retain, or certainly attract the best staff, you need to pick a recruiter that you know and trust. You need to retain them exclusively, and you need to hold them to the highest level of account, but give them the tools that they need to do the job for you properly. And if you can do that and build those relationships, you will have a much more successful outcome, for the future.
From your perspective, you're having all of these recruiting conversations, you're having these one-on-ones with all these clients or prospective candidates. What role does culture play in you selling these roles? Like the internal company culture, how often does that come up in recruiting conversations? Does it come up? Is it more about the technical aspects of the role? Because something I'm seeing shift from the candidate side is we care a lot more about work-life balance, mental health, setting boundaries. I'm curious, in your recruitment perspective, has that shift towards company culture adjusted the way recruiting is being done?
Oh, look, I think I think culture is an essential part of a recruitment process. You need to ensure that a person has the technical competencies to do the job, and you need to make sure that they culturally, aligned. That because culture or work-life balance, or what I prefer to call work-life flexibility, that's different for everybody. Some people love working 70 hours a week, afternoon off to go and see their kids, in the school athletics competition or whatever it is. So, some people like working within a team that's very social. Other people like to work, very independently, et cetera, et cetera. I think one of the biggest cultural shifts we've definitely seen is that prior to COVID, somebody might say, it'd be really nice if I could work from home a day a fortnight. That would be excellent. Do you think that this employer would let me do that? Whereas now what we're seeing is that candidates are saying, look, unless I can work from home 3 days a week, I'm not interested. Mm-hmm. So employers are having to be much, much more flexible about, allowing people to work from home than they've ever been before. I mean, for many candidates now, it is an absolute deal breaker. People have become very used to working from home. And, I don't think the pendulum, I think it will swing back a little, but I don't think we are going to go back to people being expected to come and sit in an office, for 40 hours a week, Monday to Friday. That just isn't going to happen. I think, probably more so younger professionals are starting to look for, what's your diversity policy, what's your inclusive policy, what's your I think you said setting boundaries and mental health and so on. I working at the senior executive level, we don't really see much of that. But certainly talking to CEOs and business owners that I know and work with, particularly in professional services, they'll say, like, for example, in an accounting practice, younger people coming in now, they want acceleration of their career far more quickly. Whereas previously they're happy to sit in a job for 5 years before being promoted, now they expect to be a sort of a senior partner within 6 months. They want much greater salaries. They want much more client-facing activity. And a lot of these practices are finding it very hard to create an environment that is going to retain these people because the expectations are not really in line with reality. But what I say about that is, you look at younger people now, again, from an Australian perspective, younger people are saying, I mean, when I finished university, it was you wanted to leave home, buy a house, get married, have kids, have a career. Now they say, well, I'm not really under any pressure to leave home. Mum and Dad are happy for me to stay here, and I can have my boyfriend or my girlfriend stay over whenever I want. It's the cost of buying a new house is so prohibitive now. I don't know that necessarily that's something I'm ever going to be able to do. And I saw the way my parents were treated during the GFC, where they'd been loyal to their employer for 20 years, and then the minute there's a GFC or a pandemic or whatever, they're being made redundant. So why would you expect me to be? They've learnt the lessons from our generation, and they're saying it's not relevant to me anymore. If I don't want to work here, I'll just leave and find another job next week. If I want to travel, I can travel the world, probably work wherever I want, work remotely wherever I want, work as a subcontractor if I choose to. So all of these old paradigms no longer make any sense. And so the people, who are owning or leading these businesses are going, oh my God, younger people, how do we deal with this? Well, you have to, because you're not going to see the culture that you grew up in being sustained anymore. It's no longer relevant. So you either adapt or you die.
Mm-hmm. You touched on so many great things in that, and we could do a whole episode on this one specific topic because I find it so fascinating. But it is interesting. I think there's a few things you touched on that I want to repeat back, which is I do think some people have expectations that are out of alignment with reality.
Yep.
right? And I hate to say that harshly, right? But I've had people come work for me. They've been on a team 3 months and they're like, all right, I want to get promoted at mid-year. I'm like, dude, you haven't even done your job, let alone a
Mm.
job at the next level. Like we're not ready yet. We're not even close, right? And I think there are some people who give it a bad rep because they take things too far. Their expectations are too far above board of what the reality is of working with anybody. And whether you own your own business or you're a subcontractor or you work for a company, you got to work, you got to prove yourself, you got to add value, right? Some of these things I think are tenets. I think what is interesting is at the executive level, right? I don't see any talk about that. I do in relation to recruiting, like how do we get younger people in? But at the upper levels, nobody's like, well, it's really not going to work for me that I haven't made COO in 2 years. So
Hmm.
I'm out. It's just not the same mentality. And so it is interesting, I think, how, senior leaders are going to have to learn to adjust to recruit and retain that more junior talent. But something that I talk very honestly with my team members about is, if you want these things, here's the expectations that go with that.
Mm.
And you can choose to fulfill those expectations or not. I don't care, but you will not get what you're asking for without them. So you get to make the choice, right? You can work 20 hours a week, do your core job just okay, coast at that middle performer level forever. That's fine. But if you want a promotion and a salary raise, require some of that above and beyond. So I love so many aspects of the culture and how that is playing into the recruiting field and how it's going to play into, I think, how corporations have to evolve over time. So maybe we'll touch on that if we have you back for another episode in the future. But I do want to give you some time also. You've got a book coming out. You mentioned it earlier. It is Winning the War on Talent. I want to hear a little bit more. Like, what are the ways companies can win the war on talent? What are some of the things that is setting people apart in your industry? Like, what advice do you share in that book that you'd like to share with listeners today?
Okay, great. Well, I think we've touched on a lot of it already, Kendall. So the book is called Winning the War for Talent, How to Attract and Retain top professionals or top performers. And so I think if we split that into two sections, from an employment point of view, I have a 10-stage framework. I won't go through all of it, but essentially starting at the beginning, which is about, how are you branding your business and your leaders as employers of choice to attract talent. When you're going to the market, clearly identifying and understanding what does success look like in the role. What are the key deliverables that somebody needs to achieve in order for you to be delighted by their performance? Too often position descriptions are very generic and full of a lot of motherhood statements instead of saying clearly, what do you need this person to do? People love to do what they're good at. And you want people who've done it before, they've done it well, and they're motivated to do it again. So becoming really clear on what you actually want them to do is the absolute foundation. And again, it's so interesting talking to a lot of recruiters, in particular in-house recruiters, and you say, okay, well, what does this person need to deliver? Oh, well, here's a position description. No, but what's the first 3 months? What are the critical priorities? I don't know. They don't know, right? And so if the person you're entrusting to recruit a role for you doesn't actually know what you want the person to do, of course, they're not going to be successful. Then it's about strategies of how to attract referrals, advertising, headhunting, how to interview people successfully, how to manage them through the interview process, how to deal with making offers and dealing with counter offers and so on. So it's very much a step-by-step, follow the bouncing ball. If you do these simple things well, your recruitment process will be significantly improved, enabling you to do the majority of your recruitment yourself and save money, and only need to rely on external recruiters like Arete, in particular circumstances where it's absolutely required. The other side of it then is, well, how do you retain these people? How do you develop a high-performance culture that is going to enable people to thrive within your business? And one of the things I talk about, I have a few models, but one is this idea of balancing love and accountability. So you need to love your team, but if you love them too much and there's not enough accountability, they're going to get soft and not perform. If there's too much accountability and not enough love, they're going to become brittle and either leave or become too self-interested. So how do you find that perfect intersection between love and accountability so that you are able to create a culture so that people can perform at their best and want to stay? Because you want to retain people. The cost of, hire is significant. So if you can avoid that by retaining good people, it gives you, again, a significant advantage in terms of this war for talent. So the second half of the book is very much around some specific tools and methodologies to enable you to do that. It's written, it's at the publisher, at the publisher, and hopefully we'll have physical copies by March and April. And if anybody would like a copy of that, I just provide that for free. So if anybody goes to our website, they can follow a link and they can get a copy of that book for free. That book's been very successful, and I'm really hoping that the new book is equally successful because I've reached a point in my life where I just know that if I'm happy and helpful, the universe will look after me. And so if I can be of service by helping and educating, I get a lot of personal satisfaction from that. But it also, a lot of people then come into the Arete community and we start to do business, and it's a great way to work.
Well, wishing you the best of luck on your book. We will link Richard's website in the show notes so that you guys can go back and check those out. We will also share all of the places that you can find Richard on LinkedIn as well as his business. But any parting words for our listeners, anyone who's listening who is either in recruiting or a business that you want to say, hey, tomorrow, go start doing this, save yourself some angst. This is my number one tip for you coming out of today.
My number one tip, when you're putting an ad on a job board, always, always, always put somebody's name and phone number on it.
Love
and
it.
If the person in your team is not prepared to have their name or phone number on your ad, fire them.
Ooh, I love it. I love it. I wish every job I was interested in had a job phone number and a contact. I think that's great. Seems like a no-brainer. So if you guys enjoyed today's episode, make sure that you check out Richard at the links below, as well as that you subscribe, that you rate the show, and that you guys come back and check out for more guests. The more of you guys who subscribe, the better guests that we get, like Richard, who was able to share so much wisdom today. So we really appreciate your time, Richard. We'll have to have you back to talk about your first book about how to find that hidden job market. I'm excited about that. But otherwise, we appreciate your time today. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Kendall. It was an absolute pleasure, and I look forward to talking again in the future.